Today we're going to talk about one of the most powerful and frankly one of the most difficult behavioral changes a human being can make, quitting nicotine. Whether it's cigarettes, vaping, or dipping, nicotine wires directly into your brain's reward pathways, hijacking dopamine and stress circuits. But the good news is, once you understand the biology, how nicotine affects your nervous system, and how your brain can adapt, you can leverage real science-based tools to finally quit. This is not about willpower alone. It's about learning the mechanisms, applying the right strategies, and taking back control of your health and focus. By the end of this talk, you'll not only know why quitting is hard, but also exactly how to make it possible. Nicotine is one of the most powerful substances in how it manipulates our brain and behavior, and the key to understanding why quitting feels so difficult lies in how it hijacks dopamine and stress circuits. Dopamine is often called the feel-good chemical, but that's an oversimplification. In reality, dopamine drives motivation, craving, and pursuit. It is released in the brain when we anticipate rewards, when we achieve them, and sometimes even more strongly when we simply expect them. Nicotine taps into this system with extraordinary efficiency. When someone inhales smoke from a cigarette, takes a hit from a vape, or uses dipping tobacco, nicotine enters the bloodstream quickly and crosses the blood-brain barrier in a matter of seconds. Once it reaches the brain, it binds to nicotinic acetylcholine receptors, triggering a cascade that leads to rapid dopamine release in areas like the nucleus accumbens and prefrontal cortex. This flood of dopamine creates a feeling of heightened alertness, pleasure, and relief from tension, which is why users often describe the first puff of the day as particularly powerful. The problem arises because this dopamine release is not natural in its intensity or timing. It is a pharmacological surge that conditions the brain to associate nicotine with reward far more strongly than everyday activities. Over time, the brain starts to adapt by reducing its baseline levels of dopamine and downregulating receptor sensitivity. That means ordinary experiences that would normally feel satisfying, eating a meal, engaging in conversation, or accomplishing a task, feel flat and let rewarding. In neuroscience terms, this is called a reward prediction error, and nicotine use creates a powerful one. The brain learns to predict the drug as the primary source of reward, and the user finds themselves compelled to seek it over and over, even when they consciously want to stop. Nicotine also impacts the stress system, which makes the cycle even more insidious. In the short term, nicotine reduces feelings of stress or anxiety because it stimulates dopamine and other neuromodulators like serotonin and norepinephrine. The smoker or vapor feels calmer, more focused, or more at ease, but paradoxically, the more nicotine is consumed, the more the baseline level of stress hormones like cortisol rises. This means that between doses, the person actually experiences more stress and irritability than they would if they had never been addicted in the first place. The relief they feel when they light up again or take another hit is not true relaxation. It's simply the removal of withdrawal symptoms and the resetting of stress circuits temporarily. This creates the illusion that nicotine is helping manage stress, when in reality it is fueling the very stress it appears to relieve. Another important aspect of nicotine's action is its speed. The faster a substance reaches the brain, the more reinforcing it becomes. This is why smoking and vaping are particularly addictive compared to other forms of nicotine delivery. Cigarettes and vapes deliver nicotine to the brain in under 10 seconds, creating an almost immediate link between the act of inhalation and the dopamine reward. That rapid reinforcement loop wires the brain circuits in a way that chewing gum or taking a pill never could. It explains why even people who understand the health risks, and even those who truly want to quit, find themselves repeating the behavior despite their best intentions. This hijacking of dopamine and stress systems explains why quitting is not simply about willpower. The brain is literally recalibrated to expect nicotine as its main source of reward and relief. When nicotine is removed, dopamine levels drop, receptor sensitivity is out of balance, and stress hormones spike, all of which create powerful cravings. Understanding this biology is crucial because it reframes addiction not as a weakness but as a predictable neurochemical loop. It also points directly to strategies that can be effective in breaking the cycle, because if the brain can be rewired to crave nicotine, it can also be rewired to function without it. You said, connote cravings are often described as feelings of desire or psychological weakness, but in the case of nicotine, they are deeply rooted in neurobiology. When someone smokes, vapes, or dips tobacco, nicotine binds to receptors in the brain that are designed to respond to acetylcholine, a neurotransmitter responsible for attention, arousal, and memory. These nicotinic receptors are located in many areas of brain, including regions involved in motivation and habit formation. Once activated, they trigger the release of dopamine, norepinephrine, and other neuromodulators that create both a sense of reward and heightened alertness. Over repeated use, the brain begins to rely on nicotine to stimulate these circuits, essentially outsourcing its natural regulatory systems to the drug. This is why cravings are not just about wanting the feeling of nicotine, but are the direct result of the brain's chemistry being altered to expect it. When nicotine is absent, the brain experiences a mismatch. Dopamine levels drop below baseline, receptors remain primed but unfilled, and stress-related chemicals like cortisol and dynorphin increase. This imbalance creates a powerful physiological signal that something is missing, which the brain translates into a craving. For the individual, this often shows up as irritability, restlessness, lack of focus, and an almost obsessive thought loop centered on when and how they can get the next dose. What feels like a mental battle is, in fact, the nervous system attempting to correct a deficit it has come to interpret as urgent. The craving is not imagined, it is a direct reflection of neurotransmitters, hormones, and circuits firing in a way that pressures the person to seek nicotine. Another reason cravings are so strong is the role of environmental and behavioral cues. Every time someone smokes a cigarette with their morning coffee, takes a vape break at work, or dips while driving, the brain links those contexts with the rewarding effects of nicotine. This process, known as associative learning, is governed by dopamine prediction signals. Over time, the brain doesn't just respond to the nicotine itself. It begins to respond to the cues that predict nicotine. Seeing a pack of cigarettes, smelling vapor, or even walking into a familiar place where tobacco use normally happens can trigger dopamine release in anticipation. This cue-induced craving can feel overwhelming because the brain has been conditioned to light up with expectation before the nicotine is even consumed. In fact, research shows that these anticipatory dopamine spikes can sometimes be stronger than the response to the drug itself, which is why people who quit often relapse in situations tied to their old habits. The stress system further amplifies cravings. Nicotine withdrawal leads to an overactive sympathetic nervous system, the part responsible for fight or flight responses. Heart rate can increase, mood swings intensify, and small stressors feel magnified. The brain knows that nicotine will dampen these effects temporarily, so it signals for relief in the form of a craving. This dynamic creates a vicious cycle. Withdrawal heightens stress, stress triggers cravings, and satisfying the craving with nicotine restarts the loop. Without understanding this, a person may think they simply lack self-control when in reality they are experiencing a measurable neurochemical imbalance designed to push them back toward using. Even sleep and circadian rhythms are tied into cravings. Nicotine alters the natural ebb and flow of dopamine and other brain chemicals that follow a daily rhythm. For someone who uses nicotine regularly, these rhythms become dependent on the drug. This is why cravings can feel stronger at certain times of day, such as upon waking or during mid-afternoon energy dips. The brain has been trained to expect nicotine as a regulator of these cycles, so when it is missing, the craving emerges as an urgent signal. What all this makes clear is that cravings are not simply about desire, habit, or weakness. They are the body's way of correcting a chemically induced imbalance created by repeated nicotine exposure. They reflect changes in receptor sensitivity, dopamine baselines, stress hormone activity, and learned associations. Recognizing cravings as neurobiological events is essential because it shifts the mindset from self-blame to strategy. It shows that cravings can be anticipated, understood, and managed by working with the brain's biology rather than fighting against it blindly. Timing and structured replacement strategies are critical when it comes to quitting nicotine because the brain and body operate on patterns. Nicotine use creates a rhythm of intake and reward that becomes tightly integrated into a person's daily schedule: the morning cigarette, the midday vape, the evening Dip. Each of these behaviors forms a predictable pattern that the nervous system begins to rely on. The brain is constantly tracking timing, and it anticipates nicotine at certain hours or in response to certain routines. This is why cravings often hit hardest at specific times of day or during specific activities. The brain has learned that nicotine is supposed to arrive then, and when it does not, a mismatch occurs that produces a strong drive to seek it. Understanding this timing element is the first step toward breaking the cycle, because it reveals that cravings are not random. They follow the rhythms the brain has come to expect. Replacement strategies build on this understanding by providing the brain and body with alternatives at the very moments when nicotine is usually consumed. This is not about replacing one addiction with another, but about creating structured behaviors that fill the void while the nervous system recalibrates. For example, when someone typically smokes with their morning coffee, they might instead drink water, chew sugar, free gum, or practice a brief breathing exercise at that exact time. These actions may seem small, but they are powerful because they interrupt the brain's predictive model. The nervous system expects nicotine, but instead it receives a new behavior paired with the same cue. Over time, this new pairing weakens the old association and strengthens a healthier one. Timing also matters in terms of biological states like hunger, stress, and sleep. Many people reach for nicotine during moments of low energy or heightened stress because the drug rapidly boosts dopamine and norepinephrine. Planning replacement strategies around these states is essential. For instance, a person who knows that afternoon fatigue triggers their craving can schedule a brisk walk, hydration, or even exposure to bright light during that period. These actions naturally increase dopamine and energy, providing a non-nicotine alternative to the expected boost. Similarly, stress management tools such as controlled breathing, brief exercise bursts, or mindfulness practice can be inserted into the moments when cravings are most likely to arise. Another critical element of timing is gradual reduction. Some individuals benefit from tapering their nicotine use over a structured schedule rather than stopping abruptly. By deliberately spacing out the intervals between doses, the brain has time to adjust its receptor sensitivity and dopamine balance more gradually. This reduces the intensity of withdrawal and makes it easier to substitute healthier behaviors. For others, setting a firm quit date and replacing nicotine immediately works better, but in both cases the principle is the same, timing the shift in behavior to align with the brain's rhythms. Circadian biology also plays a role. Dopamine and stress hormones fluctuate throughout the day, which is why cravings tend to cluster at predictable times. Understanding this allows a person to prepare in advance. If mornings are the toughest, a structured replacement routine should be strongest then. If evenings bring a drop in willpower, an alternative strategy needs to be ready at that time. This proactive approach turns quitting from a reactive struggle into a planned process. Replacement does not have to be limited to behavior. It can also include nutritional and sensory substitutes. Some people find success with flavored teas, crunchy snacks like carrots or nuts, or even strong mints that mimic the oral stimulation of smoking or dipping. These alternatives provide sensory input that helps satisfy the brain's learned expectation of doing something with the mouth and hands during craving windows. Pairing these replacements with consistent timing strengthens the new habit loops that gradually replace nicotine use. The combination of timing and structured replacement strategies addresses both sides of the addiction: the brain's learned rhythms and the body's demand for stimulation. By aligning alternatives with the exact moments the brain expects nicotine, a person can rewire their nervous system more effectively. This process does not happen overnight, but with consistency, the brain learns to predict reward from healthier actions instead of nicotine. Over weeks and months, the timing of cravings weakens, the intensity of withdrawal diminishes, and the replacement strategies evolve into lasting habits that support long-term freedom from tobacco and nicotine. Tools like breathwork, exercise, and light exposure are powerful levers that can accelerate the process of quitting nicotine because they directly engage the same neural circuits that nicotine manipulates. Nicotine is effective at creating a sense of focus, calm, or relief because it rapidly alters dopamine and norepinephrine levels, but the nervous system has natural mechanisms that can produce similar effects without the damaging consequences of tobacco or vaping. Breathwork is one of the most accessible tools, as the act of controlling the breath communicates directly with the autonomic nervous system. Slow, deliberate breathing through the nose with extended exhales activates the parasympathetic branch, lowering heart rate and reducing feelings of agitation that often accompany nicotine withdrawal. On the other hand, brief, rapid inhales followed by longer exhales can elevate alertness and help manage fatigue, giving a similar sense of stimulation that people often seek from nicotine. These breathing patterns can be practiced at the very moments cravings emerge, essentially overriding the brain's expectation of nicotine by delivering a shift in state through natural mechanisms. Exercise plays a similar role, but with even broader impact. Physical activity increases dopamine, endorphins, and brain-derived neurotrophic factor, all of which elevate mood, improve focus, and buffer stress. These are the same systems nicotine manipulates, but instead of creating an artificial spike followed by a crash, exercise builds a more sustainable baseline. Even short bouts of movement, such as brisk walking, push-ups, or cycling, can dramatically reduce the intensity of cravings in the short term. Over the long term, regular exercise helps recalibrate the reward pathways of the brain, restoring sensitivity to natural sources of pleasure that were blunted by nicotine use. This is why people who incorporate consistent physical activity into their quitting process not only manage cravings better but also report greater satisfaction and less relapse. Timing is important here as well. Inserting exercise during the windows when cravings normally hit can create a reliable replacement behavior that the brain begins to anticipate as a source of reward. Light exposure is another underutilized, highly effective tool. Natural sunlight, especially in the morning, triggers the release of cortisol and aligns circadian rhythms, which in turn regulate dopamine production throughout the day. Nicotine disrupts these rhythms by artificially altering dopamine and stress hormone levels, leading to energy crashes and mood instability. By deliberately exposing oneself to natural light early in the day, the brain receives a powerful timing signal that sets the stage for more stable focus and energy, reducing the reliance on nicotine for stimulation. Evening light management is equally important. Minimizing exposure to bright artificial light in the hours before sleep helps restore natural melatonin in release, which improves sleep quality. Since poor sleep is one of the strongest triggers for cravings and relapse, this simple habit can significantly increase the chances of long-term success. These tools are not just replacements for nicotine, they are interventions that repair the systems nicotine has damaged. Breathwork restores balance to the autonomic nervous system, reducing the stress spikes that often drive relapse. Exercise enhances neuroplasticity, making it easier to form new habits and break old associations tied to nicotine use. Light exposure regulates circadian biology, stabilizing mood and energy in ways that counteract withdrawal. Importantly, each of these tools is accessible, free, and immediately effective, making them ideal for use in real time when cravings emerge. The key lies in consistency and timing. Practicing breathwork once will not erase a craving, but making it a reflex whenever stress or urge arises trains the nervous system to seek regulation through breathing instead of nicotine. Exercising once may provide temporary relief, but building it into a daily routine creates a long-term buffer against relapse. Getting sunlight exposure for a single day may boost mood, but doing it every morning anchors circadian rhythms that reduce vulnerability to cravings. Over time, the brain begins to associate these practices with stability and reward, gradually rewiring the circuits that nicotine hijacked. By learning to harness these natural tools, a person creates a toolkit of state control strategies that match or surpass what nicotine offers. Instead of relying on a chemical crutch that undermines health, they discover that their own biology contains the mechanisms to achieve focus, calm, and energy. This not only accelerates the quitting process, but also builds lasting resilience, giving them the ability to manage stress and cravings without ever needing to return to nicotine. Quitting nicotine is not only about stopping a harmful habit, it is about allowing the brain to rewire itself back to a natural state where focus, mood, and health can flourish without constant chemical manipulation. When nicotine is regularly consumed, the brain adapts by changing how its receptors respond, lowering baseline dopamine levels and increasing stress hormone activity. This adaptation means that everyday pleasures, such as eating, socializing, or completing a task, lose some of their natural reward value because the brain is waiting for nicotine to create that artificial surge of dopamine. Over time, This rewiring makes it harder to feel satisfaction or motivation without the drug, trapping the person in a loop where nicotine feels necessary just to feel normal. Once nicotine use stops, the brain begins to slowly reverse this process. At first, the absence of the drug creates withdrawal. Dopamine dips, receptor systems are unbalanced, and stress hormones rise. This is the most difficult stage because cravings feel overwhelming and motivation seems low. But during this period, neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change, is highly active. The very circuits that became dependent on nicotine are now primed to adapt in the opposite direction. With each day and week of abstinence, receptor sensitivity begins to normalize, dopamine levels gradually recover, and the brain starts to relearn how to derive pleasure from natural sources. This rewiring is not instantaneous, but it is steady, and every craving resisted strengthens the new pattern of independence from nicotine. Focus is one of the areas most improved by this rewiring. Nicotine tricks the brain into short bursts of concentration by stimulating dopamine and norepinephrine, but this comes at the cost of long-term stability. Between doses, attention falters, restlessness grows, and the brain becomes less capable of sustaining effort without the drug. After quitting, as receptor systems balance out, focus returns in a more sustainable way. Instead of brief, jittery spikes, the brain regains the ability to concentrate for longer periods without the constant need for chemical reinforcement. This shift is often subtle at first, but over weeks and months, many people notice that they can think more clearly, sustain attention on tasks, and feel mentally sharper than they did during nicotine use. Mood also benefits tremendously from the brain's recovery. Nicotine dependence creates a roller coaster of temporary relief followed by withdrawal-driven irritability or anxiety. People often mistake the relief they feel after a cigarette or vape hit as genuine relaxation, but in truth it is only alleviation of withdrawal symptoms that nicotine itself caused. Once the cycle is broken, the stress baseline begins to lower. Cortisol levels stabilize, serotonin systems regulate more naturally, and the nervous system becomes less reactive to small stressors. Over time, this results in a more even and positive mood where calmness is not tied to the presence of a chemical but emerges from balanced brain function. The irritability and restlessness of withdrawal are temporary, but the stability gained afterward is long-lasting. Long-term health is perhaps the most obvious benefit, but it is also tied directly to the brain's rewiring. When nicotine use stops, not only does the risk of cancer, heart disease, and lung damage begin to decline, but the brain itself becomes healthier. Blood flow improves, oxygen delivery increases, and inflammatory processes reduce. These changes support better cognition, better sleep, and stronger resilience to stress. The body and brain are designed to heal when the toxic input is removed, and this natural healing reinforces the psychological sense of freedom and well-being. Every stage of recovery is evidence of the brain's ability to rewire. The cravings and withdrawal are signs of circuits recalibrating. The return of focus shows that dopamine systems are stabilizing, and the lifting of stress demonstrates that the nervous system is regaining balance. What began as a dependence on an external chemical gradually transforms into a renewed capacity for self-regulation and natural reward. This is why quitting nicotine is not only possible but deeply transformative, because it gives back the brain's original strength, clarity, and resilience.